Good evening, everyone, and a very, very happy welcome to our most favorite topic, the upper and the lowercase letters, whether they're a team or they are competitors, and who should come first. So, Pan and his mother are out for a walk. And Pan looks at his mama and says that, Mama, what's the difference between the upper and lower case? So she says, okay, let me play a little game with you. So she asks Pan to close his eyes and says that now I am going to introduce you to some animals. So when he opens his eyes, he sees a dog, a picture of a dog, and then he sees a duck, and he sees a cat. And then he wonders what's going to happen. So Mama says, okay. The cat says, meow. And the kitten says, meow. The duck says, quack, quack. And the duckling says, quack, quack. The dog says, bow, bow. And the puppy also says, bow, bow. So the sounds are the same. And in letters, there is something even more special. Their names are also the same. So Pan starts thinking, oh, really? And that's how he begins his journey to learn the upper and the lowercase letters and to take us ahead on this journey. We have, and we invited back this lovely young Ranjini who was with us last week too. And she had promised that she'll take us through this little patch of reading and this never-ending battle of the upper and lowercase letters. So very warm welcome, Ranjini.
Thank you.
And we are all sort of ready to hear you on this because there's so many opinions. Someone says the uppercase, someone says lowercase, someone says cursive writing, someone says print writing. And many, many years I've been actually looking at all of this and wondering what is the right way out.
Yeah.
I'm going to hand over the whole conversation to you now to take forward for us.
Okay. So, with between uppercase and lowercase, as you said, there's so many different opinions, and there are so many sort of different ways to teach it, and everybody has, based on their own experience or based on, maybe whatever they've read, they have their own ideas of what should or shouldn't be done. It's so different also visually, the uppercase and lowercase letters, for a lot of letters, look so different that it seems like a very relevant question to talk about, what the difference is. Uppercase letters are not, for some letters, they're just, big versions of the lowercase letters. But for a lot of letters, they really do look very different. And it's a struggle to kind of understand the difference and to still know that it's the same letter, as you said. So we sort of thought about it might be useful to understand how reading happens in the brain to kind of just to start this conversation, and then sort of with that in mind we can think about upper and lowercase letters.
Yes, because that is the beginning point, and like we mentioned last week, reading is acquired, it's nurtured, it's learned. So it is also a process.
Yeah.
It doesn't just come naturally to children. And most of us in schools are more worried about what letter and shape and how the child is going to write. And we really are not leading them to the reading skills and the processes required. So I had requested Ranjini to come and talk about this was that even for me, after working for about 31 years, I still want to learn how does a brain process work. Of course, this can be a completely long discussion, but she's going to make it concise, just help us to understand, and then we take it forward. So over to you.
Okay. So in the brain, reading happens or a very important part of the brain for reading is this area called the visual word form area. And it's also kind of colloquially called the letterbox. So this is the part of your brain that can associate, that recognizes letters and associates it with letter sounds. Now, this is not something that already exists in the brain. before we've had reading instruction. As you said, it's an acquired skill. So unlike other parts of the brain, that are responsible for other functions like breathing or motor control and things like that, those parts of the brain already exist. And you just have to kind of get used to doing those things and train that. But this part of the brain doesn't already exist, and you kind of have to form it. So the wiring for this particular function is something that you have to sort of take control, and we sort of make that wiring happen as a result of reading instruction. So we're literally sort of forming a new part of the brain. That's how much of a big deal it is, and that's why reading takes a long time to learn and is very, very difficult and effortful. So what the process of reading looks like is when you look at something on a piece of paper, maybe it's a word or a letter, that is visual stimulus, right? So you look at it with your eyes, and then it goes into your visual cortex in the back of your brain, and then so of course further along to this part of the brain called the visual word form area. And its visual stimulus, which is anything that you look at, is processed in several layers. So in the beginning, when it just is sort of entering your visual cortex, the more basic aspects of what you're seeing is processed, like light and dark, whether it's a sleeping line or a curved line or things like that. And then you start sort of identifying the more complex shapes, exact identity of what you're looking at. Textures, patterns come somewhere midway through the process. So it's kind of a process that goes from simple to more complicated, and by the time you get to sort of the visual word form area, you're able to identify what you're looking at as a particular letter, and you read that and associate it with a particular sound, and that's how you put those sounds together and read the word. So that is the process of reading, using this visual word form area. Now, when children are sort of being taught to do it, obviously, as you said, they don't already have this area sort of pre-mapped, pre sort of wired already. So it's very difficult. But over time, what we want them to arrive at is we want them to make it to build automaticity where it's not effortful anymore, where the visual word form area is such that or where it's just you've had a lot of practice and you've been able to kind of use your language areas as well in other parts of the brain. And by the way, it's not that this is the only part of the brain that's involved in reading, but this is just one of the main most important parts. But you want to get it to a point where you have automaticity, where you can sort of look at a word and immediately know what that word is and what it would sound like if you said it. So that is kind of the process of reading. And in terms of skills, we talk a lot about sort of there's loads of different types of skills. Last week we touched upon oral language skills and phonological awareness, which is a prerequisite skill to do a lot of the reading instruction that we otherwise do. There's also other skills like vocabulary, comprehension, and that kind of stuff. And then there's very reading specific skills like decoding ability, or the ability like letter sound correspondence. And it's actually been shown that it's more important to really work on these reading specific skills like decoding ability because and letter sound correspondence, because this is a predictor of how you're going to do at a later grade. Whereas comprehension can actually be built at a later time as well if you haven't been able to build it earlier on. But it's been shown that if a child is not at sort of the grade level, reading level by third grade, then it's really very, very difficult for them to catch up late after that. So decoding ability is, just very important to focus on. And that's because, of this really difficult process that goes on. And, it's all of this reading instruction has to take all of this into account when we're doing this. So as I said, when the signal goes into like the visual word form area, and that by that point we're not sort of at the level of looking at visual stimulus for like light or shade or lines, but we're looking at it from a letter perspective. And this is, we're trying to identify the letter, which is much more visually complex. This is the stage at which fluent readers have something called it's essentially an abstract sort of letter unit, which basically is the concept of a letter in your mind, and you can associate a lowercase letter shape with that concept or an uppercase letter shape with that concept. But because you know what the letter R or the letter L is, for example, you can look at a lowercase l and an uppercase L that you've already associated with the concept of a letter L in your brain and still identify that very, very, very sort of automatically as the letter L. So that's really important to kind of just keep in mind when we talk about uppercase and lowercase, that that's ultimately what we're going towards, is to build this one unified concept.
Also, when you're mentioning the fact that there is a need for an automation, it's like when you're driving a car, initially you're going to really be careful with the gear and, of course, the brake, etc. And then suddenly you just do it without thinking. That child to that stage to do it naturally, as naturally as possible, it means that the children have to have a certain amount of repetition, a certain amount of practice, and an amount of rhythm.
Yeah.
Initially, also, what happens is that when the children come to school, most children in India have always already seen a chart which has got the upper and lowercase letters. I think every child coming into school has seen that chart, right?
Yeah.
And then the battle begins. Everybody will ask, should we teach uppercase first? Should we teach lowercase first? Should they word build in uppercase? Somebody will say, oh, it's disastrous. You can never do that. Somebody says that no, but I only use the lowercase. And in many years of my working with children, Ranjini, I have always, this was my perspective again, I've always felt that the alphabet freeze should always have both the case up there for the children.
Yeah.
I mean, that's how I have always done it.
Yeah.
But I see schools completely isolating the uppercase or completely isolating the lowercase. So a little bit on that, please.
Yeah.
You know.
So yeah, so there have been so many different arguments for teaching uppercase first or lowercase first. And if it helps, we could actually sort of go through what some of those arguments are and whether
Yes.
it's true and whether it even makes sense. So one is just the ability to kind of differentiate between letters. And I've heard that, some teachers believe that uppercase letters are easier to differentiate between each other because they're big and have sort of standing and sleeping lines and all of that, and lowercase letters have just a lot of circles if you think about it and things like that. However, it has been shown that there are sort of confusability matrices and similarity matrices that have been done between different letters of the upper and the lower case. And it's been shown that sort of when you think about curves and lines and things like that, these are kind of more or less equally distributed amongst upper and lower case. So it's not that uppercase letters are inherently sort of more easier to recognize in that sense. And then the other argument is that lowercase letters are easier to recognize because they have the ascenders and descenders, which is basically the lines that go upward or downward above, the main sort of space where you're writing. And while that is true, and I think you're going to sort of talk about this as well, but it's been shown that while that's true, that will often give a word a very distinct shape. And if we teach children to sort of pay that much attention to whether the letters are going up or down, then they might sort of think that we're telling them to pay attention to the shape of the word itself because it affects the shape of the word, right?
I'll show the slide,
Yeah,
so that everybody understands, what we are talking about.
yeah. I think you have a really
I'll
great
just,
slide.
yeah, so I am going to try and show this slide to, the audience so that they can actually see it. So it's very interesting what Ranjini is talking about, that in case, this happens, the children start guessing the word and they don't read the word. That's the worry,
Yeah.
right? So many times when people are actually talking about this, they are not reading, the children are not reading the word, they're guessing the word by the shape. And that sometimes is a little worrying for, teachers, because the children are just not reading. I'm not able to open this. I'm not able to. Okay, doesn't matter. We'll go on. Let me see if I can.
Yeah, sure.
Let me just pick up a pen and draw it for you.
Hmm.
Yeah. So what Ranjini means is this. Okay. So suppose you write the word dog. Okay. The child gets used to seeing it like a shape. That's the
Yeah.
argument.
Yeah. Thank you. That's exactly what it is. And so, this kind of like sort of global word reading, it actually used to be a strategy that a lot of teachers used to sort of consciously
Yes.
employ as well. But this has sort of been kind of debunked because the word tag has the same shape, the word bag has the same shape, and so children, if you teach them shape wise, then either they're just going to have to remember the specific shapes of every word in the language,
Yes. Yes.
or
I've done this as a teacher when I was young too.
yeah,
Guys, yeah, because I used to
you
just,
could actually.
yeah, because I've done that. I've done that. Now, see, I've been teaching for now 31 years. I started my career when I was 21 years old almost. Time I remember I used to draw these shapes, and later I realized that no, it's of no use. Let the children
Yeah.
read the word.
And this is actually very interesting because you could actually document all of the different teaching strategies that maybe you've used. And, it's like your own personal experiment, and you have evidence for whether or not it worked and how different children respond to it. Um, so, yeah, so this kind of. Oh,
Yes.
sorry, go on.
Sorry. Please go ahead.
I was just saying that this kind of gets in the way of phonics instruction, as we talk about it, which is really paying attention to each letter and reading because you know what that letter is and what sound that letter makes. So you should be able to do that regardless of whether the letter is large or small, or if it's written in a different script or a different sort of type, like a different typeface or anything like that. And this is where that sort of one abstract letter unit comes in, that regardless of whether it's uppercase or lowercase or it's cursive or whatever, it should come into, be associated with your concept of that letter. So that's how
Yes.
strong the concept should be. um,
Yes, that is so important. So that is the part where I thought, today we must touch upon with teachers that, these 26 letter shapes, upper and lowercase, 13 are almost exactly the same. 13 of them. Now only 13 extra letter shapes you have to introduce to the children. And rather than saying that uppercase is the right way, lowercase is the right way, both can go together is the right way, shall we only do SAT, IPN and spell it out? So, what Ranjini is saying and what I'm trying to understand is that whatever letter shape you teach the children, teach them to register the shape and the sound, and it should register so well that when the child hears the sound, the child should be able to visualize the shape.
hmm, yeah, yeah.
That is the practice that needs to be given. And Ranjini, the next question I'm going to ask you is this kind of recognition that happens with letter shapes, a lot of it in India is forced through handwriting.
Hmm,
So
yeah.
before the child can actually identify, name, associate, this child is made to transcribe that letter shape 50 times.
Hmm.
And if the child goes wrong, it's erased and again. That's problem number one. The
Mm.
second problem is that the children will write, print just when they get good at the recognition. They are able to associate the name, the sound, etc. We take away the print and we change the letter shape to cursive writing.
Mm.
And now we say you read in print, but you write in cursive.
Mm.
So
Yeah.
these are two very, very prevalent problems that I see, that much before that little child can do any recognition. Right.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
let's just talk a little bit about this before we wind up.
Yeah. So, in terms of the first problem, uh, it's important to, well, actually, I'll do the second problem first because that's easier. The second problem is just, it's just a thing of repetition, right? As you said, they've just learned one thing and now we're telling them to do it in a different way. They probably don't even have uh, recognition, sort of, they haven't had enough repetition for what they've just learned. And so, and this is true for a lot of the skills that we teach, right? When we're teaching reading, we kind of often will just do as much as we think is, just the basic amount and then move on to the next thing. But then that's not really how it would work. We have to sort of make like a sort of loop back format where there's a lot of repetition and we're also looping back and revising the concepts that we've done previously and not sort of being like, okay, this is done here, let's throw that away and go on to the next concept. And also teach a lot of things even parallelly. For example, a lot of the oral language skill, we shouldn't stop teaching them, or phonological awareness, we shouldn't stop teaching them once we're doing
Yes.
letter writing and things like that. So it's really a repetition problem, because I know that here we often just sort of rush to get to the cursive writing stage, and they've just not done that enough. um, and in terms of reading letters and writing letters, when we try to sort of get kids to learn how to read letters by writing them, that adds so much sort of additional complexity to the process. Because now I also have to kind of control my sort of hand and work on fine motor skills
Eye
so I
and
can actually
coordination.
write it.
Yes.
I have to use another kind of memory where I need to sort of remember all the very specific instructions, like start from the blue line, go to the red line, dotted line. And also, very interestingly, and I suppose kind of intuitively, the letters that are easiest to read are not always the letters that are easiest to write, and vice versa. So that way we kind of just will make that a lot more sort of complicated. So I mean, it's a good idea to just start with a little bit, and also to kind of talk about the issue that you were saying, that a lot of teachers might feel like it's just a lot to teach. There are issues with being able to teach uppercase and lowercase together, and I totally understand. And I know that a lot of people want to teach lowercase because it is more prevalent in print after all, and so it is very important to teach it from a young age, as you're saying. But so if you feel like it's a lot to teach and your kids are not able to remember it, I'm so sorry. I don't know if you can hear this drilling. Um, but if you feel like kids are not able to remember it, it's always a good idea to start with small groups and
Groups
not
of
have to teach 52 letters at once. But you could start with just maybe 3 or 4 letters, and
and
enough that they can build a word with it. So maybe, SATIPN or SMAP or any of these letter groups have been chosen in a way that if you just know these 4 or 6 letters, upper and lowercase, you can build words with them, multiple words.
I'll give you another perspective. Okay, this is
Hmm.
like you said, experience. If I write the letters in order,
Hmm.
everybody is very anti-order. I've never understood that. Now suppose I teach my child to write in order. Okay, I'll start with ABC.
Hmm.
Okay, suppose I start with ABC.
Yeah.
I can make the word cab.
Yeah.
Okay, I add the D.
Yeah.
I can make dab and dad.
Yeah.
I write E. I can make bed.
Yeah.
Correct.
Yeah. Yeah.
I write F. I can make fad. I can make fed. I can make.
Hmm.
So what? So when you finish an A to Z,
Yeah.
you finish 116 words.
Yeah, exactly.
right?
And it's much more effective to teach like that also, instead of waiting to finish all the letters and then teaching the words.
Yes,
Because so far, if you just teach 52 letters and not teach kids how to make words with it, kids don't know what they're learning. They just know
yes,
that they're learning random shapes, and
yes.
for some reason it says a sound, and it doesn't even make sense. So it's really useful to teach it like that. I also wanted to touch on this other point that a lot of people prefer to start with lowercase also. I know that
Yes.
traditionally the prevalent thing is to start with uppercase and go to lowercase. But because print lowercase is more prevalent in print, a lot of people would just kind of avoid uppercase and just start with lowercase and go into the print. And I did want to say that the issue with that is that a lot of lowercase letters are very similar to one another. They're mirror images of one another, right? And evolutionarily, we're evolved in such a way, and this is again sort of going to like the brain sort of visual recognition perspective again for a minute. We're evolved in such a way that it's really difficult for us to, or we're not evolved to kind of identify the mirror image of something as a different object. It's because, for example, and I'll give you an example. If you're out in the jungle and you see a tiger and you see the tiger from the left, or you see sort of an asymmetrical tree and you see it from the left and it looks kind of like this, you should be able to also see it from the right where it looks like this and know that it's the same tree. So for us, we're kind of the most natural thing is to look at an exactly. So unless you've been taught reading instruction, to me that's the same thing. It's just the same thing from the left and the right, right? So there are a lot of lowercase letters that pose this confusion. And kids don't have that sense of like directionality, because it's only when in sort of written language that we bring in this whole aspect of, oh, this is from the left it's a D, but from the right it's a B, or you need to write from the left to the right. And that's why a lot of kids in the beginning, like, they start, if you tell them to write the name, they'll start writing in the other way around, because they're not, evolutionary, we don't give that much importance to the direction. And so that is sort of a very difficult thing to deal with if we start with lowercase letters, because then kids now need to work with the P and the Q and the B and the D and all of that. So that's, I mean, I know there are like the M and the W even in uppercase letters, but it's not such a big deal when it's like that, but it's much more of a big deal when it's like
Like
this.
that. So, Ranjini, as a suggestion,
Mm.
this conversation, I always tell everybody never put your flashcards away. That's the magic. So have the uppercase, have the lowercase, pick them up in small groups, introduce them, and then allow a lot of activity time in manipulation.
Mm.
When this manipulation happens, what Ranjini is saying is the child starts understanding that I have to manipulate it to look like this.
Mm.
If you can actually make a chart at the bottom and get them to do connections with each upper and lower case, it works like magic.
Yeah.
Because continuously, if the child is putting a small case B on a small case B and reorienting the card, the child
Mm.
is understanding orientation. This is not a natural skill. What Shri Ranjini said came so clearly to my head that if I see a bottle from here or from here, it's a bottle for me.
Exactly.
See a pen from the left or right, a pencil, it's a pencil for me. That's how the brain. So, the reason of inviting you for this particular topic was that many of us don't think like this.
Mm. Yeah.
When Ranjini told me that she is qualified as a cognitive neuroscience, the first thing that struck me is that can I ask her to help me to think more systematically? That was the whole
Yeah.
purpose of inviting you, for
Hmm.
one
And
session.
it's very helpful to think like that for
Well,
everybody, I think.
yeah, because many of us don't think like that. So also very important when we'll just wind up in another minute so that you uh, for you as somebody who's qualified with your subject, how important is this understanding of the brain for each one of us, especially foundation people?
It's so important because, especially because, see, neuroscience is a relatively new subject. If you compare it to, other things like medicine or chemistry that have been around for a while, our understanding of the brain is relatively new because, like, even till 100 years ago, we didn't have a lot of ways to look inside the brain or to even sort of, it's just like an organ that we know maybe something happens inside it, but we don't. So but now that we have a lot of techniques, we're making a lot of new findings in neuroscience, but the world has been around so far, right? And we already have so many sort of methods and techniques to do the things that we already do, such as teaching how to read. And so it's important to kind of know how it works from the perspective of the brain, because otherwise it's very difficult to understand the benefits of those techniques, and know what it's doing to your brain. There is a lot of good stuff out there and a lot of not good stuff out there. And the reason it's like that is obviously understandable, because for hundreds of years people have kind of done it on a trial and error basis. But now that we have the knowledge, you don't have to kind of try out every method for yourself. You could just know. Um, and yeah, and like for example, just to wind up, coming back to our topic, for uppercase and lowercase letters, for example, it has been sort of shown, and this is not just neuroscience research, by the way, but it's just useful to read research in this field in general. It's been shown that it is, as you said, very important for kids to learn both the uppercase and the lowercase letters when they're really young. Now, whether you'd want to kind of initially start off with maybe some of the letters and not the others because the student is just very young, maybe they're not at the stage where they can understand that two things can have the same name and the same sound, and so maybe they need to be started off with just uppercase. That is fine, but very as soon as they can sort of grasp the concept that two things can
Yes,
happen. Exactly. And do it in small groups, do it,
yes.
use it, have like use cases, use it to make words and things. But it is important to know these by the time that maybe like kindergarten, which is what we do already, but it's very important to know both cases.
Wonderful. And also, see, this is also something which I'll bring up now because a lot of times when there's responsible digital resource, it's well researched.
Mm.
It's people like Ranjini who sit down, analyze what is the right way. And, many times all of us say it's too little. We look at a nice curriculum and we will complain it's too little, it's not enough, we do much more. But maybe we are not doing that much more in the right way. Please
Yeah.
talk about that.
So that's called like a push
That's
down approach,
yeah,
which is where we kind of tend to think that if I taught my child third grade curriculum in first grade, then maybe they'll know more by the time they're in third grade. And it doesn't
yes.
work like that, because your child, if they're at first grade, then they're developmentally at the level they should
At
be at.
that stage. So, Rajini, we'll wind up today with by saying two very important things. One, that thank you for very systematically telling us how this whole process works. We will invite you back next year for a little more detailed session on this.
Yeah.
Second thing of what you told us is also going to tell us why the national education policy is going on saying, please manage your curriculums better for class 1 and 2.
Mm.
They are not being managed well for years. We've just pushed it down on the children, and the children were not ready for it.
Yeah.
So this young lady has actually helped us to understand that upper lowercase letters don't need to fight. They don't need to be competitors. They can be picked up in small groups. There is a certain process of visually taking in. For children who have visual challenges, then you texture them for the children, associate them with sounds, make it an automatic process, and then you take it forward. Am I right? Have I
Yep.
done it well today?
Absolutely. I'm so happy.
So रंजनी थैंक यू सो मच। ये सब जो हमारे दर्शक देख रहे हैं, रंजनी ने हमें बहुत सादगी से बताया है कि जो हमारा ब्रेन है उसको कैसे हमें बच्चों के साथ ट्रेन करना है। पहले कैसे बच्चा आंखों से देखता है, फिर कैसे बच्चा सोचता है, फिर कैसे बच्चा उस आकार को ध्वनि से जोड़ता है, फिर उस आकार को बिल्कुल नॉर्मली एकदम से प्रैक्टिस कर पहचानना सीखता है, और फिर आहिस्ता आहिस्ता वो पढ़ना शुरू करता है। तो अगर आप अपर और लोअर केस, कैपिटल और लेटर सिखा रहे हैं, तो उसको छोटे छोटे ग्रुप्स में सिखाइए, पूरा एक साथ सिखाने की जरूरत नहीं है, बट दोनों सिखाइए, दोनों को के की ध्वनि सिखाइए, और बहुत सारी प्रैक्टिस कराइए पेंसिल उठाने से पहले, उसके बाद जरूर दिखाइए। सो थैंक यू सो मच, ऑल्सो गेटिंग माई हिंदी as good as your team using it. Actually, you have a lovely
Hmm.
team that does the most beautiful writing in Hindi also. So, मैं
Yeah,
उनके साथ practice करती हूँ. So, thank you. And we will get you back next year again.
definitely.
And like they say, heading to the end of 2021, wish everybody a lot of good luck. We will have 2 more sessions this year, but I will be handling those sessions. And you're going to be our 2021's formal last guest after.
Oh no.
So we wind up with a very beautiful topic, a very beautiful young person. And yes, it's wonderful to see education going into such beautiful hands. I mean, I say this from my,
Thank you so
there's just
much.
so much to learn, and I think if little bit of experience and what you people do, and we can take it forward.
I think so too.
Panda is lucky to have this beautiful balance. You know, you're a beautiful team, young people, lovely energy, and God bless you.
Thank you. Thank you. Stay safe,
Thank you.
everybody.
Square, square, panda.